Welcome again, everyone, to our session today. The title of our session is Advancing Family Engagement in Education Research to Promote Equity. I'm Andy Garbitz. I'm at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm joined here with my colleagues Heather McDaniel, Sue Sheridan, and Shannon Soldo. Each of us will introduce ourselves as we move forward with the different sections of our presentation today. Here's a brief overview of where we're headed for our time together this afternoon. First, I'll provide a brief overview of the topic that we'll be discussing today. Next, we'll have 3 presentations on different facets of family engagement or family-school partnerships within education research. We'll then have some small group breakout discussions to talk a little bit more about some strategies to advance family engagement and participation in education research while embedding equity promotion activities. Then we'll wrap up with some concluding remarks. So as a brief introduction, we see consistently over time and context that collaboration with families and school interventions really is one of the best ways to maximize social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes for students. However, family-school collaboration in practice does not meet some of the aspirational tendencies that we often discuss. And oftentimes, some of the education research projects that we advance includes lower family participation. We see, though, that when education research emphasizes partnerships with schools and families, particularly across students from marginalized groups, equity improves and the process and outcome to partnerships is enhanced. Within the context of family school interventions, equity promotion, and implementation science, there are a few shared and unique elements that I think provide useful avenues or ingredients as we think about improving family engagement and education research. When it comes to family school interventions, we see core components of family school interventions that emphasize teaming, shared decision-making, partnering to support social and emotional learning. We also see, when we examine equity promotion activities, we see elements of distributive justice, of procedural justice, and of relational justice. So we think about how individuals are treated within relational justice. We think about how resources are distributed within distributive justice, and we think about how decisions are made within procedural justice. And so certainly within family school interventions, we deal a lot with shared decision-making. We think a lot about how decisions are made in a shared manner across families, across educators, and across community partners. So there are some clear shared elements across family school interventions and equity promotion activities, but there are also some distinct elements as well. When we add implementation science, we can think more explicitly about avenues to improve adoption and sustained implementation of family school interventions in an embedded equity promotion approach. So here within implementation science, we think about training and coaching to support adoption and sustained implementation of family school interventions in school and community settings. But we can also think about motivational components. We can think about how we can build efficacy of educators to partner with families. We can think about how we can more explicitly link partnering activities to student success. We can engage in value-directed activities where we talk with families and we talk with educators about their shared values around student success, about collaboration, and about working with one another. And then we can implement some volitional kinds of activities to help engage implementation planning and problem solving to really support adoption and sustained implementation of those activities. We have an efficacy replication study currently funded by IES that is examining a family school partnership intervention in the context of urban and suburban school environments. Within this efficacy replication study, we've thought about a lot about how to build an implementation infrastructure within the school district and community setting. So we've tried to leverage some of those shared and distinct elements of implementation science, of family school interventions, and of equity promotion activities. We've assembled a district leadership team that focuses on partnering across schools and collaborating across researchers and practitioners. We focused on alignment and integration of the family school intervention with other tiered activities that are occurring within the school and district. We've really centered on procedural justice. We thought a lot about how decisions are made, whose decisions we're advancing, and who those decisions influence or affect. We've also engaged in some really systematic implementation planning, where we try to take some of those activities and put them into action. We have three main goals for our session today. For the next few minutes, we're going to review some examples of IES-funded family school projects. Then we're going to identify some implementation strategies to advance family engagement and education research to promote equity. We're going to use the small group breakout function to think together about lessons, about suggestions, based on your experience and on some of the presentations that we'll go through today. Then we're going to ask you to share the notes from those breakout discussions with us so that we can compile those suggestions, summarize those suggestions, and report out those suggestions in a white paper that will follow our session. So with that, for the next few minutes, we're going to move into some presentations from three individuals who are with us today. The first is titled Creating Meaningful Engagement Through Relationships. The second, Maximizing Caregiver Involvement in a Targeted Positive Psychology Intervention. And the third, Leveraging Integrative Data Analysis to Understand Family Involvement within the Coping Power Program. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Sue Sheridan to talk about creating meaningful engagement through relationships. Sue?
Thank you very much, Andy. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. As Andy mentioned, I'm Sue Sheridan, and I am the director of the Nebraska Center for Research on Children, Youth, Families, and Schools at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And I have this opportunity today to talk about something with a group of folks who hopefully share my passion around relationships. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I've been doing this research for many, many years, and it's just astounding to me how much we've learned over the years and how much we're really beginning to understand the great impact that we can have for children's learning and development when we really embrace those really significant systems that support them across the home and school environments. We do so much work. We spend so much time focusing on what happens in the classroom, what happens in the school, and those hours between 9 and 3 when we have, the ability to really do some pretty meaningful, important things for children. But we really can't be serious about helping and supporting children achieve to their greatest potential unless we embrace those other socializing systems, those other environments, those other meaningful adults in their lives. And that is, of course, the family systems. And so I learned very early on in my career as a practitioner of the sheer importance of families. And it's just been my pleasure to have the opportunity to do this work for several decades. I would be remiss if I didn't start by recognizing some key collaborators with whom I've worked over the years. And it's always so terrible to start with a list of names, because as soon as you do that, you recognize that you're missing so many. And really the folks who I should do probably the most significant shout out to are the parents, the families, and the educators with whom we've worked. I also, though, need to acknowledge IES because over the years, over the 30 or so years that I've been doing this work, they've been very, very generous in funding our research. So I'm going to dive right in today. Andy talked to us a while back about presenting some barriers to family engagement. So we're really here to talk now about strategies for supporting families in the work that we do as researchers and as educators around the shared goals that we have for children, right? That is helping children achieve to their greatest potential. But he asks us that we start maybe identifying a few barriers to engaging with families, or engaging families in the educational arena. And I'll start by saying, we all know this in our heart of hearts. I think we all know that families truly do want what's best for their children. Immigrant families, for example, come to our country with one sole purpose, and that is to give their children an opportunity, maybe the best opportunity, to have a prosperous future. They entrust their children to us as educators, and they really want to do whatever's necessary to help their children be successful. So to me, the barriers, if you will, lie in the things that we do as educators and mental health practitioners. The things that we control are really what's creating barriers, systemic barriers for families as they try to become more engaged in their children's education. These systemic barriers create inequities, they create inequalities, and they contribute to educational disparities for children who are already marginalized. Some of these include things like differences in language and communication. Certainly these are challenges, but they become barriers when we don't do what needs to be done to address language differences in our attempts to communicate with families. A one-size-fits-all mentality is another barrier, if you will, but it's one that we own. It's one that, when it comes to children and families, this notion that one size fits all. In other words, we fail to take into account the unique cultural assets and individual differences in our approach with families. A third barrier would be these pre-existing negative assumptions that are often made by the privileged majority culture in schools. Logistical barriers exist. Certainly, we all know about them, but they become intractable when we are just unwilling to change them. Again, things that we control. Strained relationships between students, families, and teachers, mismatched expectations that go unchecked, and our lack of attention to mental health needs of students and families. All these things lead to disparities. And there are sources of disparities. These as sources of disparity, these are really exacerbated for children for whom academic or social, emotional, and behavioral challenges are present. So they really sort of are heightened in those situations. I could spend all day talking about this one slide, but I won't do that. We'll go to the next slide because it's much more, I think, beneficial to start talking about solutions. And to me, and hopefully all of us here today, family school partnerships is a potential solution. They have the potential to encourage engagement and promote equity and reduce disparities for marginalized groups. And in our work, we're doing a lot of work with families of Latin origin. And so we're going to be talking about that a lot today. In true partnerships, families and school personnel find ways to communicate effectively, to share ideas and input, to collaborate in this give and take manner. Okay, in real partnerships, processes are put into place that allow families and schools to continually evaluate and reconstruct systems that target inequities and these, negative attitudes. Partnerships have the capacity to replace misunderstandings and disparaging interactions with trusting relationships. So I'll again have the opportunity to talk about an intervention today, teachers and parents as partners. It's also historically been known as conjoint behavioral consultation, or CBC, as an intervention that we've been studying for many, many years. It's an established evidence-based family school partnership intervention. It appears in the What Works Clearinghouse and has been demonstrated to have positive outcomes, with no reservations. It's very family-centered. It's used to support students with academic and social behavioral needs. So it tends to be used as sort of a more targeted intervention versus a universal intervention. And it really focuses on strengthening relationships between families and schools to support and hold up students and develop competencies. I'll try to be brief here. In the TAP intervention, parents and teachers work in collaboration with a school-based consultant, and they go through a series of stages is very, sort of structured but flexible, if that makes sense, approach, where we start by identifying a student's strengths. We build on those strengths, but we also identify things that are interfering with the child's ability to show their capacity and achieve to their greatest potential. So we're focusing on strengths, but we're targeting these things that need to be supported, these concerns or target issues. We operationalize those. We then meet again after collecting some preliminary information about what might be contributing to those concerns, what might be interfering based on things in the environment that might be going on. And we co-create meaningful plans that are used across home and school. When I say we, I mean, yes, this individual who serves as a specialist to create bridges and form partnerships, but it's really the families and the educators who work together to come to agreements about what can be utilized at home and at school in meaningful ways to support one another, to create continuities, and to use this bridge between settings as another sort of support network for kids. And then they come back again for a third meeting after they have the opportunity to intervene and test things out and check in to see how they're doing and if the students' goals are being attained. So TAP has the potential for promoting engagement of families by reducing these rigid boundaries between systems, by bridging systems, by respecting families and educators as co-equal partners, as well as many of the other systemic barriers that I mentioned before. I mentioned that we have been focusing in our study, in our center here at UNL, on most recently, we just finished an RCT. We're on to some new work, building on what we've learned, but we finished an RCT where the focus has been on Latinx families. Before even beginning that study, though, we wanted to understand some of the sources of systemic barriers that were impeding Latinx families from being engaged in the ways that they wanted to be. So we conducted a series, initially some focus groups with some Latina mothers to try to understand both the goals that they had for their children, as well as the barriers and challenges they had in terms of engaging in their children's education. And then we also conducted a lit review so we could look at evidence-based and best practice recommendations from the literature about engaging with families from marginalized groups in our research and in education. Through the focus groups and a lit review, we identified both structural and relationship-based strategies for promoting family engagement. Structurally, we worked to minimize some of the logistical barriers that I mentioned before. I mean, these are things that we can control pretty easily. But what really hit us pretty hard was that the relationship-based strategies really gave us a lot of latitude. If you look at the list here, you'll notice that the majority of strategies that came up in our work as we aggregated across the focus group and the lit review work that we did, the majority of these strategies are relationship-based. They included things like increasing cultural awareness among educators, providing direct face-to-face contact, personalized interactions with families, increasing opportunities for communication. When it comes to engagement, it's really about relationships. So given that the majority of the practices to promote family engagement are relationship in nature, we wanted to know what specific CVC strategies were effective at strengthening relationships. So on the next slide, you'll see some results from another study that we did in the context of this RCT. While we were engaging in the RCT, we did this secondary analysis of some of our data to begin to unpack what contributes empirically to high quality parent-teacher relationships. So we explored what features are present in parent-teacher interactions that then lead to positive relationships with one another. We did a latent profile analysis study led by Shannon Holmes, one of my previous doctoral students now at University of Missouri. And we found that parent-teacher interactions that were characterized by high levels of these 4 characteristics were significantly positively related to parent and teacher reports of positive relationships. So things like engagement, that is warmth, promoting warmth and positive interest and input during the meetings, fluid interaction, even distribution of taking turns and talking versus highly structured and rigid verbalizations in meetings, understanding one another's perspective. And these are things that the school specialist can do in the context of these meetings to promote engagement, support perspective taking among participants, and support coherence. So as information is being shared, it's integrated, and we're using this opportunity to really promote inclusivity and this notion of we're in this together. So fast forward a few years, if you go to the next slide, Andy, we completed this RCT with Latinx families, and we followed up with focus groups. Thanks to Jackie Buckley, shout out to Jackie if she's here. She is the program officer, encouraged us to do a deeper dive into the experiences of Latinx families, so that we could learn more specifically about what they experienced, how they intersected with this family school partnership intervention. And through the focus groups, we just learned an immense amount about the experiences of families that we don't often ask, right? We don't ask enough about how it feels to them, the things that we do as educators. So we asked, and they reported first that to them, TAP was very family-centered. It felt as though they fit really well with their cultural strengths. Next, we learned in the next slide that as a function of participating in this TAP intervention, they really felt like they had a much improved relationship with their child's teacher, including the quality and quantity of communication. Third, they felt as though their participation really helped increase their own feelings of competence and confidence as parents, as well as partners in their child's education. And finally, and I love this one, the last one, TAP gave them voice, right? They felt heard and understood, in some cases for the first time in the US school system.
A targeted positive psychology intervention. It's an intervention that is primarily student focused. It aims to build student skills and evoking positive feelings and building relationships, but it has a pretty important family component to help students generalize those skills and hopefully impact wellness at home. So Sarah and I shared a good bit of information at the NASP conference in a session on maximizing caregiver involvement in a school-based positive psychology interventions. And I wanted to acknowledge our many graduate students and postdoctoral fellows who work with us to analyze our data on caregiver preferences and ultimate engagement. And we are thankful to IES for funding this study that we're doing along with collaborators at the University of South Florida and UMass. So a little bit of background about the intervention that we are evaluating that includes a caregiver component. Our intervention is a positive psychology intervention that's intended to evoke positive feelings and build relationships in an attempt to improve students' subjective well-being, which is a scientific term for happiness. It contrasts with traditional mental health interventions that are intended to reduce negative feelings of anxiety, sadness, anger, and instead to evoke positive feelings. And our intervention in particular that we're evaluating is a tier 2 selective intervention. So we screen students for life satisfaction, which is a global feeling of contentment with your life, and also screen for feelings of positive emotions such as joy, interest, enthusiasm, and contentment. So the student-focused part of the intervention is for students that are identified as having low levels of subjective well-being in a school-wide screening. The intervention that we're evaluating right now is in a middle school context. And for the students that have low life satisfaction and low positive affect, we invite them to take part in a small group counseling intervention that consists of 10 core sessions that I'll show you more about on the next slide. And each of the 10 core sessions introduces its own positive activity that is a skill students can use to evoke positive feelings about their past, in their present, or in the future. And when they finish those 10 core sessions that are led by a school counselor, school psychologist, school social worker, then the program turns to having monthly booster sessions where they review the framework for increasing well-being, practice activity learned in the fall sessions, and then continue to build relationships with students in the group, with their group leaders, and at home. So that's the complete promotion program for the students. So on the next slide, it's a small, quick overview of what we're doing with the students. So our primary targets are things like gratitude, kindness, optimistic thinking, hope, and identification and use of character strengths. Where our caregiver component comes in is at the very beginning. We first invite families to take part in a parent information session where we ask our caregivers to come in and learn for about 30 minutes what we're going to do with their students, why wellness is important, how they can support student learning at home, and then really demystify any kind of misconceptions they might have. Maybe ask questions like, is my child depressed? That's not what we screen for, actually. We screen for a presence of positive feelings. Should my child still get mental health care for whatever else they're in care for? Absolutely, because traditional mental health care reduces pathology. What we're doing is increasing wellness. So that first 30-minute session is really important for us to introduce the science of happiness and have them understand what they're going to be doing, what their student will be doing in the weekly sessions. So after that first week session, then there is a weekly handout that students are receiving to bring home to their parents, and we also send it to the parents directly. And the weekly handout includes a one-page summary of the content that students learned in session. It defines key concepts, recaps the take-home challenge of the week, and includes some tips on how caregivers can continue the learning at home. And we feel like that introductory information session and those weekly summary handouts are a relatively minimal level of family involvement. We're trying to reduce the ask. We don't ask parents to come in each week or talk to us each week, but we're trying to find that balance of giving them enough information, enough opportunities to reach out without overwhelming them. And we want parents involved for lots of reasons. It helps their students get bought into working with us. It helps students generalize the skills at home. And if families can do the activities at home that we're doing with their children, we also have some hope that we might increase well-being at the family level. So in the Wellbeing Promotion Program, we try to maximize caregiver involvement at 3 touch points. The first is our initial contact with families when we ask permission for their children to take part in the small group counseling session. And that most likely overwhelming consent form that we send home in multiple languages includes the information on why we're doing the program, but also we ask information from the families on how they would like to be involved. So we share with them that we would like for them to come in for a information session at the very beginning of our work, and then receive weekly handouts so they can be apprised what their child is learning. And on that consent form, we ask them, how do they best like to be communicated with? Via text, phone, email, a different option, in what language, and for the information session, what time would they like it to be, and also what modality. Would you prefer an in-person session? Would you prefer it be on Zoom, remote, or do you want to receive a pre-recorded video? So when we look at that first component, the caregiver information session, we try to offer 3 to 5 of those per school, or a combination of remote and in-person at the school, as well as an asynchronous option to all families. And we have found that even offering with that level of mixed modality, that our level of family involvement has really been quite variable. Between 13% and 2/3 of the families that we've invited have actually taken part in a 1-session information session. That's in contrast to how many of our families say they would like to take part in the program. So in that consent form, we say, how would you like to be engaged? Would you like to take part in that session in person, remote? asynchronously or not at all, and only 22% of families have said not at all. So despite the overwhelming majority saying they want to take part in a session, so far only 20% of our families have actually taken part. And I'll share with you some data now on how who takes part aligns with what they have said they would like to do. So I have some data from our schools in Florida. That's on the darker blue top line, and our schools from Massachusetts. The majority of families have said they would like to take part in that one session that's an information session in a pre-recorded format to receive the information in a link to a video they can watch on their own time. The next most popular option has been a remote live recording. So we offer several Zoom-based ways of joining. Some families said in person, about a quarter said not at all, and then we've had some other responses. We have seen a trend over the last few years of our project for more families to want to come in person. In the height of COVID, no one wanted to come in person. That makes sense. So we've offered this year an in-person session along with our live and asynchronous recordings. In terms of what time of day people want to come in, it's everywhere. We have not seen a rhyme or reason across our sites. Instead, what our lesson learned is that we need to offer information sessions for families, some in the morning, some in the afternoon, some in the later afternoon, and some in the evening. In our schools in Florida, we've seen a somewhat larger preference for those evening hours and after school hours, but still enough families, about 40%, that we want to have some daytime options too. So putting that all together, go ahead, next slide, Andy, thank you. What we have here is who has actually come to the sessions and what modality. So in person, we had in the last year, 8 families come in person. 3 of them are families that also said in our consent procedures that they would like to come in person the most, but 8 people who said they want to come in person did not make it in. So a minority of folks who said in person actually ended up coming in that direction. For the remote synchronous, those are live Zoom sessions. 44 families attended in that way. 22 of those 44, so half, said in the consent forms that's how they wanted to attend, and that's indeed how they showed up. But 66 did not indicate that how they wanted to take part on the consent forms, but still 66 families said on the consent forms that they would like to take part in a synchronous fashion, but that didn't work out for them. And then asynchronous seemed quite popular when families first enrolled in the program. 95 parents on the consent form said, yes, I would like to come in to I would like to receive an asynchronous session. 4 more said that and actually watched the video we sent them. And then 5 who didn't say that watched the video we sent them. So even though getting a pre-recorded video and watching it seemed really popular, families are choosing to enroll in our program, many families said they wanted to receive a pre-recorded video who never watched it. A total of 9 families actually watched it. And of those 9, 4 indicated that's what how they wanted to take part in the session beforehand. And then the other 5 didn't, but ended up seeing it that way. So we didn't see a lot of congruence for how families took part in the initial information session. At the end of the intervention, we asked families to do a survey where they indicate on a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree, what were the factors that helped them or got in the way of them taking part in the caregiver information session or the weekly handouts. And the families who took part in the caregiver information session, we asked them why. And the most strongly endorsed reason was, I wanted to understand the activities my child was learning. Then we looked at a number of other facilitating factors based on Hoover-Dempsey's model of parent involvement. And some of them also appeared in our sample, that these parents felt confident they could engage in the session, or they were concerned about their child. And the things that weren't endorsed as often were things like, I came because I was encouraged by my child or someone at school. So the parents who didn't come, on the next slide, we asked them the same thing. You were invited to come. What got in the way of you coming? And the most commonly endorsed reason was, I simply didn't have enough time. But right up there also was, I trusted the school to provide the program well, and my child is able to complete activities on their own. It's like, my kid has this, or my school has this, was a pretty commonly endorsed reason. So in terms of how families wanted to receive the weekly information, we saw an uptick in the last year of wanting to receive it via text message, but we had a relatively equal split between email and text, with more by text in the last year, equal split across states. So we invested in a service this year to send out mass text messages, to send out those weekly handouts and hard copy with the children via the school's electronic communication, like sort of Canvas or email system, and text services. And the next slide we have is how often parents engage in those weekly handouts. On the far right, you see an example of what weekly handouts look like. Here's one for the week where students learned gratitude journaling. And at the end of the intervention session, families who were in that condition were asked about how much they engaged in those weekly handouts. And on average, what we saw is 17% of parents engaged discussing or using activities at home. An additional 50% at least read the handouts, and about a third said, nope, didn't use this material. And parents tended to be more engaged with the materials that were handed out at the very beginning of the intervention. Okay, go to the next slide. So we did the same thing where, based on Hoover Dempsey's model of parent involvement, created a list of potential motivators and facilitators. And at the end of the 10 weeks, asked parents what helped you engage in those weekly program activities, or what kept you from doing it. And the most commonly endorsed reason was, I wanted to understand what child was learning, followed by, I had a positive feeling about my school's counselor. I felt confident in being able to engage in those activities, and I wanted to learn how to do them myself. So lots of reasons to engage with the weekly handouts. The things that tended to prevent families from being more involved was, again, trusting that my middle school student had this covered, or that my school was doing a good job without my involvement. And then some parents endorsed, I was not aware of the activities. But what was not endorsed very often was that they had difficulty understanding it, or they didn't feel like it was a parent's place to be involved. We sent home the letters in multiple languages, which might have been helpful for that 1 second to the bottom. So we changed this year. I mentioned after seeing how many parents said that they wanted to receive a text message, we sent home the weekly communication in text, in addition to email and hard copy, which we had a positive response from our families too, and included some wise feedback, which is starting with the positive greeting, being specific for what we want the families to get out of that communication, and expressing a strong belief the family will be able to meet these high expectations. So in the next slide, what you see is an example message that my team at UMass put together that we sent home to all of our families. On the far left, it's an example body of the email wise feedback, and the far right on the bottom is an example of what a text message would look like. And that positive message, why we're doing it, and our belief that they could actually follow through, is what was in the body of the email to accompany the one-page handout on what their child did that week. So in conclusion, what we've learned is to get families involved. Obviously, want to use multiple methods of communications, offer meetings at various times of the day, offer various modalities. Don't totally trust that what families think they're going to be able to engage in is what they actually end up engaging in, but offering those modalities to everyone, not just aligning it with preferences, and sharing handouts in multiple ways. And on the final slide, we just have some concluding comments that we have felt positively that parents and caregivers can get involved in a meaningful way through a relatively minimal expectation of the one session where they come in, or they learn about what their children are doing in real time, and then receive weekly handouts to keep them apprised of the information. And our contact info is there. Reach out to myself or Sarah at our email addresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. It looks like there's one question popping up in the chat. If you are open to answering this one, this says, Were families engaged in the design of the intervention, handouts, initial sessions? Do you think engaging them in the design would or wouldn't change their engagement in some of those activities?
Yeah, that's a great question. They've been involved in the iteration of this intervention over time to make it skinnier and skinnier. So like less information on the page, the information session going from 60 minutes to 30 minutes. So we've had feedback over the years on what families would like to hear from. So we've tried to meet that middle ground. We always ask for feedback at the end of the program on what we'll do differently. And without fail, you can't please them all. Some people would like more opportunities to engage in other. So the reason we send it via email in addition to text is so that families who want to write back and have that bi-directional communication with the school counselor can still do that. Good question.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So with that, we'll move on to Dr. Heather McDaniel.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, my name is Heather McDaniel. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia. Today, I'm going to share some work from our team supported by a new grant from IES, which uses an innovative method, integrative data analysis to explore family involvement, particularly Black caregiver engagement, and a Tier 2 evidence-based program for youth demonstrating aggressive behavior. I do want to acknowledge at the outset of this that the work I will present here is a retrospective look at 11 randomized control trials, which we hope will inform future research on promoting true family-school partnerships. While the Coping Power intervention was developed and has been optimized in partnership with students and families, and the student and parent groups offer opportunities for clinicians to learn from student and families, there's an opportunity to target more true partnerships in future implementation of Coping Power. And we hope that the promotive factors identified in this work will inform that future work. So today I'm going to focus specifically on engaging families in school-based mental health services, and we'll share just a bit of context as some of my colleagues have covered some of this already. We know that there's a gap between those youth who need access to behavioral health services and receipt of those needed services. And Black youth have particularly notable gaps in access to behavioral health services. Fortunately, of youth that do receive these services, including Black youth, many receive behavioral health services in schools, such as through co-located community mental health services or special education. While students themselves are likely to engage in school-based mental health services, there are many barriers to engaging families, and family involvement can be suboptimal. The research I'm sharing today is focused on the Coping Power program. Coping Power is a Tier 2 preventive intervention for youth demonstrating aggressive behavior in schools. The program is a cognitive behavioral intervention based in Lachman and Wells' social cognitive model of student aggression. The model focuses on student social cognitive appraisals and social problem solving, as well as positive parenting practices. The program is originally designed is multi-component, including both a student-focused group and a parent-focused group component. The student group curriculum includes cognitive behavioral content related to social problem solving, promoting inhibitory control, and academic-related skills. The parent group focuses on increasing positive parenting practices such as praise, rewards, and effective instruction, and parental involvement in education. So when we look at the research on family involvement in Coping Power, research to date has suggested that both the parent and student groups are really important to convey impacts on outcomes. They convey unique impacts on student outcomes, suggesting that both the parent and student components are important for program success. However, while students are often engaged in Coping Power, for example, in some trials approaching 90% student attendance, which is great, parent engagement has been suboptimal, with some parents never attending and overall attendance rates ranging from 30 to 50%. So these data points suggest there's a need to explore predictors of parent engagement in Coping Power so that we can target sort of engagement interventions towards parents and families that maybe are more at high risk for non-engagement or dropout. So our team is leveraging a new method to study family involvement, integrative data analysis. Integrative data analysis focuses on the harmonization of raw individual level data from multiple studies. So this moves beyond sort of the focus of traditional meta-analysis, where we're focused on aggregated study level data, and we're focusing on individual level student data. When we're harmonizing individual level data, IDA offers sort of many benefits associated with large sample size. We have increased power to detect traditionally underpowered effects. So here it's really important related to moderation. We have more power to understand how risk and promotive factors for family involvement may vary for families of varying characteristics, such as for minoritized families. In IDA, we also benefit from increased sample heterogeneity. So this is important in family involvement research because in any one trial, family involvement might not be very high, but across the whole, there are likely to be families that are more and less involved. And finally, in the context of IDA, we can ask new questions that haven't been possible in individual level studies. For example, we can compare across trials and study conditions within the trial to understand if program variations impact parent involvement. So in our integrative data analysis, we're combining data from 11 randomized control trials focused on coping power. Across these trials, there are approximately 3,200 participating youth with elevated aggression in approximately 200 schools. In each trial, coping power is delivered in at least one arm of the trial. Standard coping power, as we previously discussed with the student and the parent components, is delivered in many of the trials, as are different versions of coping power that are optimized in various ways or individually delivered. And the overarching study, we're predominantly interested in how this tier 2 evidence-based practice targeting externalizing problems may have crossover impacts on academic outcomes. So we're trying to contribute evidence to support a theory of change for how social and behavioral school-based interventions impact academic outcomes with a very careful focus on what works and for whom under what conditions. So in the context of the IDA work, we can zoom out to focus on the full 11 RCT study set. And as mentioned, we can ask new research questions that have not been previously explored. Here, we are asking new questions related to how student and parent engagement are associated with academic outcomes and trying to understand how study and student-related factors are related to student and family involvement, so that these factors can then be leveraged in future work developing school-family partnerships. We're particularly interested in how different versions of coping power are associated with family engagement and how coping power versions may impact engagement differently for families of Black youth. In addition to zooming out to study the full study set, we can also zoom in on single studies. It has allowed a renewed focus on each individual RCT to focus on unique family involvement related innovations. So just two quick examples here. In one study, we have unique data on school climate and school contextual variables that are not common to any other studies. In this study, we're working on understanding how school contextual variables are associated with family and student engagement and coping power, and how these associations might vary for minoritized families. In another example, one study has a unique text message nudge strategy to engage parents in the intervention, but at home. We are exploring whether this was a feasible and an acceptable strategy for family engagement. So our team is really excited to use integrative data analysis to dive deeper into family involvement, both in zooming out to a full set of randomized controlled trials, but also in zooming in on innovations that were less explored in individual studies. We believe that this retrospective look at previously conducted trials can meaningfully inform future work. And in this future work, we hope that there can be a stronger look at how implementing coping power can be done in the context of school-family partnerships. We're also really excited to think about how IDA may be further leveraged to understand family involvement in education research, as well as how other innovative qualitative and quantitative methods might be leveraged in this space. I do want to acknowledge the team that I work on with this across 3 institutions, as well as the funding from IES and NIMH that make this work possible. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, Heather. So next, our plan is to go into breakout groups. As I mentioned, we really had 3 main goals for our time together today. One was to set the context for family school interventions, family engagement in a way that is really equity centered, to think about how we might be able to sort of leverage some of those shared and unique elements across family centered and family school work to address or improve family engagement, participation, and partnerships in that work. We also were really interested in hearing more about 3 specific projects or studies and some of the main interesting outcomes and lessons and ideas, methodological principles or tactics that are being advanced. Then we wanted to try to identify some key themes across those areas so that we can really focus on some of this work and identify some key lessons that we might take as a collective group and move forward with after this session. So our hope and desire from these breakout groups is that you'll work together for the next maybe 10 minutes or so, identify a note taker. In your notes, include some contact information, as well as any points or themes from the discussion that you share, and then email those notes to me. And then we'll work on compiling and summarizing those notes along with some key themes from this conversation so that we can generate a white paper that advances some of the notions, topics, and ideas that were discussed here today. Within the context of your breakout groups, you might think about barriers or facilitators or different strategies that we've talked about today, maybe that you've learned from your own work. You might also consider family engagement through the equity lens that I described earlier, to think about like how distributive justice, relational justice, and procedural justice might offer unique areas of focus and suggest certain strategies that could be implemented. We might think about differing definitions of engagement, or what family engagement might mean to different families over time and context. You might also include suggestions from your own work, strategies or ideas, suggestions or recommendations that are popping up for you in the work that you're addressing. So going back to some of the topics that were discussed during the conversations that we've had so far, in addition to some of those guiding principles, you might consider what strategies could be used to improve families' comfort and confidence. What strategies might be helpful in demonstrating the importance of partnering around student learning and development, the role of testimonials. We might think about who makes decisions about family engagement. How is outreach framed? What do those conversations look like, and how can those discussions influence engagement? We might think about how previous or ongoing relationships among families and educators might influence engagement, and what could be advanced to address some of those relational issues that Sue described and that were discussed over time as well. And then what are some implications for equity? How do one or more of these approaches promote or inhibit equity or centering equity in family engagement, education, research? We might think about options for personalizing outreach. We might think about different sources or kinds of information that we could share with families, and how we might engage in values-based activities with school professionals to think about aligning or addressing barriers, overcoming obstacles, and then planning to overcome certain issues that might be coming up in school-based settings. So I'm going to copy and paste these questions and principles into the chat. And Greg, do you have some of the breakout groups set up at this point?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, so we're going to set up these breakout groups. We're going to take about 10 minutes to have conversations among those groups. I'll send these questions and guiding principles out so they're broadcast to the groups, and we'll come back together with some concluding remarks and next steps. So I see those breakout rooms have popped up. Feel free to join those as you have a moment. We'll come back together in a few minutes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello.
Glad that really grateful to you all for taking that time to talk among your groups. We're really looking forward to seeing some of the themes, topics, suggestions that came out of those conversations. We think that there's a lot that we can advance in this space, and we're really excited to compile and summarize some of your conversations so that we can develop a white paper to really advance this area of work forward. But we wanted to, before we end the session, just wanted to take a few moments just to check in with you to see if there were any questions that came up for you as you discussed among your groups, either questions that you wanted to address to a certain presenter, questions across sessions that you would like to raise up, or if there were any takeaway points, themes, topics, or suggestions that you'd like to mention here in the large group session. Feel free to share those in the chat, or if you'd like to share them verbally, feel free to unmute yourself and do that as well. Let's just pause for a minute for folks to share any thoughts that they'd like to raise up during this time.
I'll shout one out, just a takeaway from the presentation. I really appreciated the emphasis on the importance of relationships. That's something that we talk about quite a bit. And while it didn't come up in our small group, exactly, it does stand up to me quite a bit in terms of an equity piece, in terms of a data collection piece, in terms of an accessing interventions for students and their families piece, that relationship part with families is really key. And so really appreciate all of the ideas and thoughts in that space.
Thank you, Rohana. I think that's that's been a takeaway point for me as well. And I think really maps on nicely to the relational justice aspect of social justice that I think is a nice kind of intersection between, these two literatures as well.
Hi everyone, I would like to share too. My name is Alejandra Garcia, and I was in a group with Katie De Silva, Ben Fisher, Emily Doolittle, and myself. And we had I really liked the discussion because even though people in our group are very highly educated, they think when it comes to my experience as a parent, I leave it to the school. So we were having the question, are parents going to be able to engage with all the things that they have in their plates? So kind of really considering what is possible and what they are able to give, and also how schools are really making that possible. And the conclusion that, yes, it is difficult, but it's so important, because if we really want to impact the outcomes of educators, of students, we really need to involve the most important people in their lives, who are their parents. And I think a question that came out at the end is when we talk about parent engagement in research, in educational research, what are we talking about? Are we talking about, do we want parents involved as participants in our studies? Do we want to parents involved as attendance in school-based interventions? Or are we really talking about parent-school partnerships? So it's just these are different things, and we really need to define past the debate of if it's parent involvement, if it's homeschool collaboration, and all of the other terms that we have used in the literature. So yeah, thank you so much.
We had a similar conversation, well, because I said, even when I was looking at the topic of this session, I wasn't sure if we were going to be talking about interventions that are focused on family engagement, or actually engaging families as participants in our studies. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that, much of the research that we do is around family-centered practice, or that I have been doing is around family-centered practices, but we've also been having a lot of discussions on our teams about how do you do family-centered research, where you're kind of maintaining the rigor of the study, but also engaging in practices that allow families to continue to participate, and what's the give, or what's that line. But I think what we're finding is a lot of the strategies that we use to engage them in interventions are the same things we have to do to retain them as participants.
These are such good points. And I think, yeah, really speak to the myriad of issues that are, so central to this line of work. And I think we're just reflecting on one of those points relative to a point that Jackie Buckley made earlier, which is kind of the generation of new measures. I think we don't have enough measures that capture the myriad of ways that families are involved, care for, support, their children. And so I think that definition piece is, I think, a really critical thing to center on, as we move forward. So I'm just looking at the time, and I would love to spend the rest of the day talking with you all about these topics. If you wouldn't mind, would love to have the chance to review the content of some of your conversations. If you could email those to me when you have a moment, I'd really appreciate it. Then we can summarize that information, compile it, and then check in with individuals at IES for maybe the best avenue to share out some of this really important information. So thank you so much for being here with us, sharing the space, and being in conversation with us about these really important topics, and wish you the best for the next part of your day. Take care.